Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about The Garden of Forking Paths by Jorge Luis Borges. The story actually reminds me of a deep fake video made several years ago of former US President Richard Nixon delivering a speech he never gave in real life.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. Good night.
Well, this was a speech Nixon actually prepared in case the Apollo 11 mission failed. Though fate didn't call for its delivery, half a century later, an MIT project brought it to life through artificial intelligence. The director of the project said, and I quote, "Deep fakes can be used for many of the things we already know, but also to create alternative histories or have the potential to rewrite history as well." Well, we often believe that history is set in stone, but what if this concept of alternate realities isn't just the stuff of science fiction? What if our universe is but one thread in a vast tapestry of infinite possibilities? In The Garden of Forking Paths, Borges creates a labyrinth of time, a growing, dizzying web of divergent, convergent, and parallel times. And this fabric of times contains all possibilities. Yu Xun is a Chinese man living in England, working as a German spy during the World War I. And the story is actually his confession as he awaits execution, but the first 2 pages of the confession are missing. So it starts with Yu Xun describing himself, hanging up the phone, and then recollecting that the voice in Germany on the other end was that of Captain Richard Madden, a British officer, which means his spy ring has been compromised. And he believes his conduit, Victor Wunberg, through whom he was supposed to pass on the message to Germany about the name of the exact location of a British artillery park, has been arrested or murdered, and he will be the next. So he needs to find a way to get his information to the Germans before Captain Madden arrests him. Going through his possessions, including a revolver with a single bullet, he comes up with a plan. He checks the telephone book and locates the name of the only person capable of helping him passing on the information. Yu Xun explains he's not doing this for Germany, the barbaric country that has forced him to become a spy. He just wants to prove to his leader, who looks down on the Asians, that a yellow man can save his country. He heads to the village of Ashgrove, but buys a train ticket for a station farther down the line to confuse his enemy. As the train pulls out of the station, he sees Captain Madden running down the platform, having just missed it. The next train will arrive in 40 minutes. When Yu Xun disembarks the train, some children ask him if he's going to see Dr. Stephen Albert. Without waiting for his answer, they say the house is far away, but he'll find it by turning left at every crossing. Yu Xun realizes that the directions that the children have given him to take every left turn is the advice for getting to the middle of certain kind of labyrinths. And he's thinking of his great-grandfather Cui Pen, who gave up temporal power to write a novel containing more characters than the Hong Lo Meng or Dream of the Red Chamber, and to construct a labyrinth in which all men would lose their way. However, he was murdered by a foreigner 13 years later, and no one could find the labyrinth or understand his novel. As Yu Xun walks, he hears distant music drawing him to a pavilion. He realizes the music is Chinese. He knocks on the door, and a man comes out holding a lantern and speaking Chinese. The man is Stephen Albert, and he asks Yu Xun if he has come to see the Garden of Forking Paths. The Garden of Forking Paths, the term stirs Yu Xun's memory as he reveals that's the garden of his ancestor Cui Pen. Well, Albert turns out to be a sinologist who claims to have figured out Cui Pen's labyrinth, and he said The book and the labyrinth are actually the same thing. And he shows Yixun a fragment of a letter written by Cui Pen which says, "I leave to several futures, not all, my garden of forking paths." Albert explains in most books a character makes a choice, but in Cui Pen's novel, the character chooses simultaneously all alternatives, and in doing so, the character creates several futures, and the futures will also proliferate and fork. Also, Albert determines that the word time never appears in the novel. Since a riddle can't have the answer in the question, Albert believes the Garden of Forking Paths is a huge riddle whose subject is time, and explains instead of believing in a singular linear progression of time, Cui Pen believed in an infinite series of times, a growing, dizzying web of divergent, convergent, and parallel times. And this is Cui Pen's image of the universe. In most of those times, we do not exist. In some, you exist, but I do not. In others, I do and you do not. In others still, we both do. Yixun declares that in all times, he is grateful to Albert. But Albert corrects him, saying that in one of the countless futures, they are enemies. Yixun feels the garden is filled with infinite versions of himself and Albert, but when he looks again, he sees only Captain Madden coming down the path. Then, as Albert rises and turns his back, Yixun shoots and kills him. Yixun is arrested by Madden and sentenced to hang. The name of the city where the British artillery park is located is Albert. He sees in the newspaper that the city was attacked, and the same newspaper also covers the murder of Albert by Yixun. Yixun believes he has successfully got the message through to Germany, but he says the leader does not know, and no one can know his endless contrition and weariness. Well, on the surface, The Garden of Forking Paths reads like a classic spy thriller, but is riddled with improbable coincidences like the two kids randomly pointing Yixun towards the exact person he needs to find, and that person happened to be the only one who deciphers the labyrinth of his ancestor. It's like the whole story is a dream. It unfolds as Yixun's confession, but the first 2 pages are missing. So we jump in right in the middle. Just like a dream, there's no clear beginning and things just happen. And the pacing is all over the place. 1 minute Yixun is racing against the clock, the next is chatting with a scholar about labyrinths and time. It is as if time bends to Yixun's mental state. So I guess Borges intentionally blurred the lines between reality and fiction, just like he did in his many other works. In The Garden of Forking Paths, Yixun's great-grandfather Cui Pen wanted to write a novel with more characters than the Hong Dou Meng or Dream of the Red Chamber. In the first chapter of this Chinese novel, the character Zhen Shiyin encounters a Buddhist monk and a Taoist priest who guide him to the land of illusion, and the entrance is marked by a couplet that reads, "When the unreal is taken for the real, then the real becomes unreal. Where non-existence is taken for existence, then existence becomes non-existence." Well, I think this is somehow paralleled in The Garden of Forking Paths, where we get lost in this labyrinth created by the writer, unable to tell which is real and which is unreal. And more interestingly, Yixun, the protagonist in The Garden of Forking Paths, kind of shares a name with a character from Dream of the Red Chamber, Jia Yucun, because, in some translated versions, Jia Yucun is spelled exactly as Jia Yuchun. And in Chinese, the names Zhen Shiyin and Jia Yucun sound like true events concealed and false words remained, respectively. So could Borges be subtly hinting that Yixun's narration might not be entirely reliable? And also, let's go back to the very beginning of the story. It begins with a seemingly straightforward historical reference. On page 242 of the History of the World War, Liddell Hart tells us that an Allied offensive against the Sarah Mounteban line, to be mounted by 13 British divisions backed by 1,400 artillery pieces, had been planned for July 24, 1916, but had to be put off until the morning of the 29th. Torrential rains, notes Captain Liddell Hart, were the cause of that delay, a delay that entailed no great consequences as it turns out. The statement which follows, dictated, reread and signed by Dr. Yi Sun, former professor of English in the Hawk School at Qingdao, throws unexpected light on the case. The two first pages of the statement are missing. While Liddell Hart was a real-life British military historian, he did write extensively about war, but none of his works were called The History of the World War. However, a passage from Liddell Hart's book, The Real War, bears some resemblance to the one cited in the Garden of Forking Paths, and it reads like this. The bombardment began on June 24th. The attack was intended for June 29th, but was later postponed until July 1st, owing to a momentary break in the weather. This postponement, made at French request, involved not only the spreading out of the ammunition over a longer period and consequent loss of intensity, but a greater strain on part of the assaulting troops, who, after being keyed up for the effort, had to remain another 48 hours in cramped trenches under the exhausting noise of their own gunfire and the enemy's retaliation. Conditions made worse by the torrential rain which flooded the trenches. So if we compare the two paragraphs, the dates are different and the consequences of the delay are different, because Liddell was actually saying that the bad weather had made a huge difference on the result of the battle. Well, it reminds me of the story Talon Ukbar Orbis Tertius, which begins with a fictional encyclopedia with 4 extra pages than the original one. But also I'm thinking, what exactly is real and what is unreal? We often view history as a set of established facts documented in textbooks and historical accounts, but is history truly objective? Is it in essence a collection of narratives or interpretations of past events shaped by the perspectives and even biases of those who record them? Yi Sun's confession may not be reliable, but the narrator or the editor of this confession is not 100% reliable either. And isn't Liddell Hart's supposed account of the World War also simply his personal lens on historical events? Perhaps the real story is forever lost, and none of us can truly travel back in time to witness these events firsthand. Well, by saying that we cannot travel back in time, I tend to regard time as linear, as flowing from the past to present to future. The passage of time has often been compared to the flight of an arrow and to an ever-rolling stream. The 17th century English poet Robert Herrick once wrote, "Gather your rosebuds while you may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smells today, tomorrow will be dying." Standing by the river, Chinese philosopher Confucius said, "Time passes by like this, flowing away day and night." We tend to perceive space and time as fundamentally different. We can navigate space, travel to different locations, and even explore other planets with the right technology, but when it comes to time, we are seemingly stuck, unable to choose a different point in the timeline. And this inherent difference shapes our understanding of reality, because a distant location might be inaccessible at present, but we acknowledge its existence nonetheless. Time, however, feels more elusive. The past seems to have vanished completely, while the future remains unformed and uncertain. And I think that's also what Yi Sun appears to believe at the beginning of the story, because when he realizes he'll be arrested and murdered by Captain Madden, he contemplates, "Despite my deceased father, despite my having been a child in a symmetrical garden in Haifeng, was I now about to die? Then I reflected that all things happen to oneself and happen precisely now. Century follows century, yet events occur only in the present." Well, this is what philosophers would call presentism. It is the idea that only the present is real. The past and the future only exist subjectively. The past is memory and the future is prediction. It is only the present which exists objectively, independent of our minds. But there are certainly other ways to look at time, and time is exactly what the story is playing with. Presentism's opposite is eternalism. This philosophical view posits that all moments, past, present, and future, exist equally as real. The present doesn't hold any special privilege, it's simply the moment we are currently experiencing. In this sense, both history and tomorrow's events exist simultaneously, even though we cannot interact with them directly. Eternalism can also be visualized through the block universe theory. Imagine space as three-dimensional, with length, width, and height. Now let's add time as a fourth dimension, creating a four-dimensional space-time. Time becomes an integral part of the physical structure of the universe. If we can step outside this universe and observe it as a whole, the past and future would be eternally fixed within this block, existing as long as the universe itself does. In Borges' story, as Yu Xun walks down the road thinking about his great-grandfather's labyrinth, he seems to experience a shift from a presentist to an eternalist perspective. I imagine a labyrinth of labyrinths, a maze of mazes, a twisting, turning, ever-widening labyrinth that contained both past and future and somehow implied the stars. Absorbed in those illusory imaginings, I forgot that I was a pursued man. I felt myself, for an indefinite while, the abstract perceiver of the world. So it seems that Yu Xun is no longer just a guy on the run. He becomes someone who can see beyond the limitation of the present moment and see all time at once. And the term the abstract perceiver suggests a godlike view from outside this block universe. Although eternalism may seem like a strange way of thinking about the world, it is somehow supported by the current laws of physics. Well, according to presentism, only the present exists objectively, but this assumes that the present moment will be the same for everyone. That's Newton's idea of absolute time, which says there is a single universal clock that keeps the same time for all observers. But Albert Einstein's theory of relativity challenges this concept. Einstein proposes that time isn't absolute. Past, present, and future are all relative to the observer's frame of reference. Think about it this way. Defining now for a distant part of the universe can be tricky, since nothing can travel faster than light. Any event we observe far away has already happened in its own past by the time we see it. And imagine a super-fast spaceship traveling through space close to the speed of light. For the astronauts on board, time would actually run slower compared to people back on Earth. This is known as time dilation. Furthermore, events that appear to happen at the same time for one observer might occur at different times for another in a different frame of reference. Therefore, time isn't a separate entity from space, but rather intertwined in the concept of space-time. The familiar flow of time we experience in everyday life might just be a subjective perception. As Einstein famously wrote to a friend, the past, present, and future are only illusion, even if stubborn ones. While Einstein explored times through a scientific lens, Borges' approach leans more towards the philosophical. Here's how Stephen Albert explains Cui Pen's novel to Yu Xun.
Unlike Newton and Schopenhauer, your ancestor did not believe in a uniform and absolute time. He believed in an infinite series of times, a growing, dizzying web of divergent, convergent, and parallel times. That fabric of times that approach one another, fork, are snipped off, or is simply unknown for centuries, contains all possibilities. In most of those times, we do not exist. In some, you exist, but I do not. In others, I do, and you do not. In others still, we both do.
Well, this concept bears a striking resemblance to the many-world interpretation of quantum mechanics, which proposes that every quantum event splits the universe, creating a new branch for each possible outcome. However, the story was written before this theory became widely known. According to Borges himself, he got the inspiration from F.H. Bradley's Appearance and Reality. I checked that book and there's a statement like this. In the universe, we might have a set of diverse phenomenal successions. The events in each of these worlds, of course, be related in time, but the series themselves need not have temporal relations to one another. The event that is in one need not be after or before or together with the events in any other. Well, it's interesting to learn that science and philosophy, or metaphysics I should say, sometimes overlap. But even if it's true that time forks perpetually into countless futures, how can we ever know it, as we are inherently limited to experiencing only one path of the infinite possibilities? Well, here again, Borges exploits a godlike perspective. Stephen Albert seems to possess a godlike view. He claims to understand all the paths, even insisting that on one path, he and Yu Xun become enemies, as if he knows that he will be killed by Yu Xun. And the description of his appearance further emphasizes this godlike view. His face, in the vivid circle of the lamp, was undoubtedly that of an old man, though with something indomitable and even immortal about it. Yu Xun also experiences a glimpse of the multiverse. After hearing Albert's explanation, he senses the dew-drenched garden that surrounded the house was saturated infinitely with invisible persons. Those persons were Albert and myself, secret, busily at work, multiform in other dimensions of time. Well, doesn't that sound like the omniscient God sitting outside space-time and observing the past, present, and future all at once? Interestingly, even though the story presents countless universes with infinite possibilities, these paths seem to converge towards the same outcome. In Cui Pen's novel, there are two versions of the same battle. In the first, an army marches off to battle through a mountain wilderness. The horror of the rocks and darkness inspires in them a disdain for life, and they go on to an easy victory. In the second, the same army passes through a palace in which a ball is being held. The brilliant battle seemed to them a continuation of the fate, and they win it easily. So both paths lead to the same result. And the same pattern appears in Yu Xun's world as well. He imagines that if Richard Madden didn't miss the train, he'd be in jail or dead. However, in his real world, he ultimately faces imprisonment anyway and is about to die. And if we take a closer look at the ending of the story, Yu Xun believes he has successfully transmitted the secret city name to Berlin through the murder of Stephen Albert, evidenced by the newspaper report of a bombing yesterday. However, the problem is, it is the same newspaper which reports his murder. So logistically, Berlin wouldn't have time to receive and decipher his message before the bombing. So this implies they might have already possessed the information. So ultimately, Yu Xun's actions or inactions wouldn't have changed the outcome. So why do the forking paths ultimately lead to the same destination? I guess perhaps the answer lies within the labyrinth itself. In Greek mythology, the labyrinth is a complex maze designed by Daedalus to imprison the Minotaur, and it represents a place of confinement and inescapable twists and turns. So I guess Borges may be using the labyrinth as a metaphor of our existence within this, the confines of time and space. We may have the illusion of choice, yet we all ultimately reach the same destination. And there's another coincidence in the story that I found very interesting. Stephen Albert is the only one who understands Cui Pen's theory, and they both dedicated themselves to unraveling the mysteries of time, and they happen to share the same destiny, both killed by a stranger. This reminds me of another time theory, cyclical time, which sees time as a cycle repeated over and over. According to this theory, life is a circle. You're born as a person, then you turn into dust, and then generated into something else. This concept is reflected in Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Hinduism, where samsara represents the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that continues until the stage of nirvana is achieved. So according to this theory, Cui Pen and Stephen Albert can be the same person. So which time theory does Borges believe in? Perhaps neither of them has convinced him, as he himself stated in an interview. I think that time is the one essential mystery. Other things may be mysterious. I remember St. Augustine said, "What is time? If nobody asks me, I know what it is. If I am asked, I am ignorant. I do not know." I think that the problem of time is the problem. The problem of time involves the problem of ego. For after all, what is the ego? The ego is the past, the present, and also the anticipation of time to come, of the future. So these two enigmas, those two riddles, are the essential business of philosophy. And happily for us, they will never be solved. So forever we can go on. We can go on making guesswork. We will call that guesswork philosophy, which is really mere guesswork. We will go on weaving theories and being very much amused by them, and then unweaving and taking other new ones. Well, that's all I got for the Garden of Forking Paths. I believe you must have different interpretations, so please leave me a comment. And if there's another story or book that you want me to talk about, feel free to let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.